"I'm not fit for any man," ugly mail-order bride said. "But can I love your children?" Cowboy went Quie. Clara Whitmore had never considered herself beautiful. She grew up in a small, quiet town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and appearances seemed to matter more than kindness or intelligence. From a very young age, Clara realized that she did not attract the attention that others did. Her hair was brown and plain, her eyes a dull shade of green that rarely seemed to sparkle, and her hands were rough from the work she did helping her parents around the house and on their small farm. She had learned to carry herself with a quiet dignity, to avoid drawing unnecessary attention, and to find comfort in simple things. But even with all this, she often wondered if she would ever belong somewhere, if anyone could ever truly need her for more than just labor. Clara's childhood had been filled with modest happiness. Her parents were hardworking people, deeply rooted in the values of honesty, discipline, and community. Her father, a kind man with a patient demeanor, taught her how to tend the small vegetable garden, fix fences, and care for the chickens. Her mother, gentle and warm, had taught Clara how to sew, cook simple meals, and listen, truly listen, to people when they spoke. Despite the simplicity of their life, there was love and security. Yet, as Clara grew older, the world outside her family began to feel overwhelming. School was never particularly easy for her. She was intelligent, yes, but she struggled with self-confidence. When her classmates spoke of future dreams, relationships, and admiration, Clara often felt invisible. Boys rarely noticed her, and girls often seemed distant, wrapped up in their own beauty and popularity. At school dances, she would watch quietly from the corner, smiling faintly as others paired up to dance. It was not that she disliked people, she simply felt that she had no place among them. The whispers, subtle or otherwise, about who was beautiful, who was desirable, and who was not, were like shadows that lingered over her, reminding her that she had been placed somewhere near the margins. Despite these feelings of inadequacy, Clara found small joys in the ordinary things of life. She loved reading stories by candlelight, losing herself in the adventures of characters far braver or more fortunate than herself. She cherished mornings when the sun poured into the small kitchen where her mother baked bread, and the smell of warm dough filled the air. She enjoyed the quiet afternoons when she could walk through the fields near her home, feeling the grass brush against her legs and listening to the wind rustle through the trees. These moments were her refuge, a space where she could feel whole even if the rest of the world did not seem to notice her existence. Her sense of being overlooked deepened as she entered young adulthood. While other women received invitations to social events, compliments on their looks, and proposals of marriage, Clara remained mostly unnoticed. She had suitors now and then, but they were often polite rather than enthusiastic, offering safe words and gestures rather than genuine admiration or interest. Clara accepted this reality with a quiet resignation. She did not feel angry, she simply felt the persistent ache of being unseen. She would smile politely, nod in response to greetings, and continue about her work. Still deep inside, a longing remained, a hope faint but persistent, that one day someone might see her for who she truly was, not for what she lacked. Life's hardships arrived sooner than she expected. In her early 20s, her father fell ill. The illness was sudden, relentless, and cruel. Clara watched as the strong, steady man she had relied on weakened day by day. She stayed by his side, tending to his needs, preparing meals, and trying to offer comfort even as her own heart ached. When he passed away, the world felt emptier, colder, and more frightening than she had ever imagined. Her mother's health, already fragile, declined quickly after that. Clara became her mother's sole caregiver, balancing grief with responsibility, doing everything she could to make life bearable for her. A year later, Clara's mother also passed away, leaving her entirely alone. She was 23, with no siblings, no extended family, and only the modest home her parents had left her. For the first time, the reality of life without anyone to turn to fully sank in. Clara realized that she could not remain in her small town forever. There were debts to settle, repairs to make, and survival to consider. She had no inheritance of wealth, no connections of influence. Her world had contracted to the size of her own determination, her own hands, and the small savings she had managed to set aside. It was during this time of uncertainty that Clara came across the newspaper advertisement that would change the course of her life. It was an old, folded sheet, left in the corner of the general store, and she almost ignored it. Yet something drew her to it. The ad was simple, clear, and unlike the usual matrimonial columns that spoke of youth and beauty. It was written by a widowed rancher named Daniel Hayes, who lived far to the west. He was seeking a wife, not for wealth, not for appearances, not for social connections, but for companionship and to help care for his 2 children. Clara read the ad several times, her heart pounding in a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. The idea of leaving everything familiar, of traveling across the country to meet someone she had only known through letters, was terrifying. But at the same time, it sparked something new within her, a sense of purpose. She was honest about her appearance and her experience in her response letter. She described herself as plain, hardworking, and capable of care. She did not try to embellish her life or pretend to be someone she was not. The honesty was freeing. She could not promise romance or beauty, but she could promise devotion, care, and integrity, things that mattered deeply to her. Weeks passed. The wait was long, filled with nervous anticipation and self-doubt. Clara imagined what Daniel Hayes would be like, tall, strong, perhaps serious, perhaps kind. She worried about whether he would find her acceptable, whether the children would like her, whether she would be able to manage life on a ranch. Yet she also felt a quiet excitement. For the first time, she felt that she was moving toward something, rather than merely drifting through life. Finally, a letter arrived. Daniel's handwriting was firm and unpretentious. He explained that he had read her words carefully and appreciated her honesty. He had lost his wife 2 years prior, and while the ranch work was demanding, he needed someone capable and kind to help care for his children. He did not mention beauty or appearances. He only mentioned honesty, reliability, and a willingness to be present for his family. Clara studied his letter again and again. She felt the weight of the moment. This was not a casual invitation. It was a chance to belong somewhere, to be needed in a way that transcended superficial expectations. She packed her modest belongings carefully, her heart full of fear and hope. She knew the journey would be long, that challenges awaited her, and that she was stepping into an unknown world. Yet she also knew that she had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by trying. The day of departure arrived. Clara boarded the train with a single small suitcase, a heart full of uncertainty and a mind full of quiet determination. As the train rattled across fields, rivers, and hills, she thought about the life she had left behind and the possibility that awaited her. She thought about the children, about the ranch, about the man who had written the letters. Most of all, she thought about herself, about the woman who had always believed she was not enough, who had carried a lifetime of quiet loneliness and longing. Somewhere deep inside, she realized that this journey was about more than survival. It was about hope. It was about the possibility that she could be more than invisible, that she could offer love, care, and stability to those who needed it most. It was about stepping into a life she had never imagined, one where her quiet strengths might finally be seen and valued. By the time the train approached the western town where Daniel Hayes lived, Clara had resolved herself to face whatever awaited her. She did not yet know the man or the children, nor the challenges of the ranch, nor the difficulties of adjusting to a new life. But she knew this. She would give everything she had to do her best to care for the children and to be honest and kind in every action. She took a deep breath as the train slowed, watching the landscape unfold outside the window, wide plains, distant mountains, and the endless sky. For the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore allowed herself to feel something that had been foreign to her: anticipation. She was leaving behind the life she had known, with its quiet sadness and unnoticed moments, to step into something unknown. It would be frightening, it would be challenging, but perhaps, just perhaps, it would also be a place where she finally belonged. Clara's heart pounded as the train slowed to a stop at the small wooden station near Cedar Ridge. She had never been this far from home before. The western landscape stretched out in a vast, almost endless plain, dotted with distant hills and clusters of trees. The air smelled different here, sharp with dust and faintly of livestock. The station itself was small, a single platform with a few benches and a hitching post where horses were tied. The quiet was heavier than the gentle hum of her hometown. She gripped the handle of her suitcase tightly, taking a deep breath as she stepped onto the wooden platform. Her legs trembled slightly, a mix of fatigue from the long journey and the nerves of anticipation. She had spent weeks imagining this moment, rehearsing polite words, thinking of ways to make a good first impression. Yet now that it had arrived, she realized that rehearsed words might not be enough. This was real. There was no turning back. Daniel Hayes stood near the hitching post, tall and broad, with a wide-brimmed hat shielding his eyes from the bright sun. His clothing was simple, worn jeans, sturdy boots, a faded shirt, yet there was a quiet strength in his posture. His face was weathered, marked by years of work in the open air, and his eyes, a deep brown, seemed to carry a history of loss and responsibility. Next to him were two children, a boy and a girl, who clung quietly to his coat. The boy, Samuel, looked cautious, with his lips pressed into a thin line and his gaze carefully observing Clara. The girl, Rose, younger and smaller, seemed more curious, her eyes wide and unafraid. Clara's steps slowed. She felt a knot of anxiety twist in her stomach. This was not a casual meeting. She was stepping into someone else's life, into a family already shaped by loss and routines she did not yet understand. She wondered what they would think of her. Would Daniel see her as adequate? Would the children accept her? Would she be able to meet their expectations, or would she falter under the weight of responsibility? When she finally reached the edge of the platform, she spoke softly, barely above a whisper. "Hello," she said, trying to steady her voice. I am Clara Whitmore." Daniel removed his hat politely, giving her a careful, measured look. He studied her with a mixture of curiosity and caution, as though trying to read her from the way she held herself, from the small expressions on her face. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She noticed the way he glanced at her hands, rough, calloused, and then back up to her face. Perhaps he had imagined someone different. Perhaps he had expected someone brighter, more polished. She swallowed, reminding herself that she had offered honesty in her letters, not beauty. Before Daniel could speak, little Rose stepped forward, her small hand reaching for Clara's. "You look tired," the girl said plainly, her voice gentle. "Papa says tired people need soup." Clara blinked in surprise, her heart warming despite the nervous tremor in her chest. She knelt slightly to meet Rose at eye level. "Soup sounds perfect," she said softly, letting a small smile show. "Thank you." Samuel remained more cautious, his small fists tucked into his pockets. He studied Clara carefully, his lips pressed together as if measuring her intentions. Clara turned to him with a gentle smile. "Hello, Samuel," she said. "It's very nice to meet you." He nodded once, still silent but not resistant. Daniel's face remained unreadable. He had expected a bride, someone who would quickly fit into the household routines, and now here stood Clara, small, quiet, and plain. She did not radiate confidence or charm in a conventional way. And yet there was something in her honesty, something in the way she carried herself without pretense, that gave him pause. He had read her letters, yes, but seeing her in person brought the reality of her presence into sharp focus. Clara set her suitcase down carefully, aware of the weight not only in the bag, but in the situation itself. I know I'm not fit for any man," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly but steady. "But if you allow it, I can love your children." The words hung in the air, delicate and heavy at the same time. Daniel looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to measure the truth in them. She did not embellish, did not promise more than she could give. She simply offered what she knew she could: care, love, presence, and honesty. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft whistle of the wind through the station. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. He had expected words of politeness, perhaps even some modest charm, but this was different. Clara's words were simple yet profound. They acknowledged her own perceived limitations while offering something of immense value, a heart willing to nurture the children he loved fiercely. Finally, Daniel nodded, his expression softening just slightly. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the path leading to the ranch. "Let's get you home," he said quietly. Clara's stomach fluttered. The journey to the ranch had already begun, yet she felt as though a small door had opened within her, a door she had thought forever closed. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward him, each step carrying a mixture of nervousness and cautious hope. The ride to the ranch was quiet. Daniel led the way on horseback, with Clara following in the wagon carrying her belongings. Samuel sat stiffly beside her, still wary but occasionally stealing glances. Rose, on the other hand, leaned against Clara's shoulder, fascinated by her presence, asking small, curious questions about the train, the towns she had passed, and the books she liked to read. Clara answered carefully, keeping her tone light and friendly, careful not to overstep but wanting to show warmth and kindness. As the ranch came into view, Clara's breath caught. The house was modest but sturdy, a wooden structure with a broad porch and windows that reflected the golden sunlight. Surrounding it were wide fields, fences holding cattle, and a barn that stood tall against the horizon. She could see the work that lay ahead, the chores, the responsibilities, the daily rhythm of a ranch, but it no longer felt intimidating in the same way it had on the platform. Here, she had purpose. Here, she could give care where it was truly needed. Upon arrival, Daniel showed Clara the house, giving her space to place her belongings and settle in. The children watched her quietly, observing the way she moved, the gentleness of her actions, and the care she seemed to radiate without effort. Clara noticed how careful she needed to be, how her presence was new and unfamiliar to them, and she resolved to let them acclimate at their own pace. Dinner was simple, bread, butter, and soup, but Clara made sure to prepare it with care. She spoke softly to the children, asking Samuel about his day and encouraging Rose to share her favorite stories. The children's responses were cautious at first, but slowly they began to warm to her presence. Samuel even smiled once when she showed him a trick with a spoon, and Rose laughed at a playful story she shared about her childhood in the East. Daniel watched from across the table, his jaw tight but his eyes thoughtful. He had expected someone who would simply follow routines, someone who could manage the house, but Clara offered more than that. She offered attention, presence, and an ease with the children that felt almost instinctive. He realized that what she lacked in polish, in conventional beauty, she more than made up for in heart, dedication, and sincerity. As the evening settled into quiet, Clara found herself sitting on the porch with Daniel for a moment of private conversation. The sky stretched wide above them, the stars beginning to appear, tiny lights in a vast expanse of dark. The wind carried the scent of grass and earth, and the silence felt gentle rather than oppressive. "You have a long journey behind you," Daniel said softly, not unkindly. "Yes," Clara replied, her voice quiet, "and yet it feels like I have only just begun." Daniel's eyes met hers. For the first time that day, he saw not just a woman arriving at his doorstep, but someone offering herself fully, someone whose honesty and humility were as powerful as any charm. He realized that the life he had been managing alone, the care of his children, the running of the ranch, the quiet ache of his heart, could find a partner not in appearances or perfection, but in dedication, sincerity, and love offered without expectation. Clara, for her part, felt a cautious hope blooming. She still doubted her own worth, still believed she was plain and ordinary, but in the quiet presence of Daniel and the children, she felt something she had never known before: possibility. Perhaps she could belong somewhere. Perhaps she could make a difference. Perhaps she could finally be needed, not just for work, but for love. That night, as Clara lay in the small room Daniel had offered her, she reflected on the day. She thought about the children's cautious glances, Rose's gentle hand in hers, and the quiet strength of the man who had written letters asking for her presence. She realized that life could be more than survival, that love could be simple, and that sometimes the greatest courage was in being honest and vulnerable. As sleep finally claimed her, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future where she belonged, not perfectly, not without struggle, but with love, care, and quiet purpose. She did not yet know all the challenges that awaited her, but she felt ready to face them. The journey had begun, and for the first time in her life, she felt that she was exactly where she needed to be. Life on the ranch was nothing like Clara had ever experienced before. The days were long, filled with chores, unpredictable work, and the constant rhythm of the land. She rose before the sun, often hearing the wind whistle through the open fields and the low calls of cattle that needed attention. At first, the sheer scope of responsibilities overwhelmed her. There were fences to repair, animals to feed, wood to chop, laundry to wash by hand, and meals to prepare. Every task required strength, patience, and focus. Clara was not used to physical labor at this scale. In her old life, she had helped her parents, yes, but the ranch demanded more than she had ever imagined. Some mornings, her muscles ached so deeply that she could barely lift a bucket of water without wincing, but she refused to complain. Instead, she reminded herself of why she had come here. She was not here to be admired for beauty or charm. She was here to care, to serve, and to create stability for Daniel's children. That thought gave her courage. The children were both a challenge and a source of unexpected joy. Samuel, 8 years old, was cautious and reserved. He had learned to be independent after the loss of his mother, and he was slow to trust anyone new. He watched Clara with wary eyes, rarely smiling, often keeping his distance. Rose, 5, was more open, curious, and unafraid. She would follow Clara from room to room, asking endless questions, testing boundaries, and seeking attention in small, persistent ways. At first, Clara struggled to balance their needs. Samuel resisted help with his schoolwork, insisting he could do things himself, while Rose became impatient if her curiosity was delayed. Clara learned quickly that patience was more than a virtue here, it was a necessity. She discovered that listening carefully was often more effective than giving advice. When Samuel wanted to work on a small wood project for his father, Clara watched from the sidelines, quietly offering tools and encouragement. She didn't take over, she didn't criticize, she simply provided guidance when it was needed. Slowly, Samuel began to relax around her. Meals became one of the first ways Clara began to bond with the children. She baked bread each morning, learning how to manage the old wood stove without burning the crust. She cooked simple meals but infused them with care, carefully measured ingredients, warm flavors, and a touch of creativity. She noticed the children's reactions, and over time they began to trust her in subtle ways. Samuel started to ask her for help in the kitchen, asking how to mix dough correctly, while Rose would climb onto a stool to watch her prepare meals, giggling at small mistakes and enjoying the process. Even Daniel noticed the changes, though he rarely commented directly. He observed Clara as she moved through the house, tending to the children, repairing small items, and managing the endless chores of ranch life. He could see that her work was not done for recognition or reward. It was done out of a genuine desire to care. And while Daniel remained cautious with his heart, he could not deny the warmth that Clara brought to the household. The children laughed more often, the house felt less lonely, and the small routines that had once felt burdensome now carried a sense of life and comfort. There were many small challenges along the way. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept through the valley, sending wind howling and rain lashing against the windows. The cattle panicked, breaking through a section of the fence, and Clara immediately jumped into action. She helped Daniel corral the animals, using ropes and calm words to guide them back to safety. Samuel watched her closely, his eyes wide with admiration as he realized that Clara was capable, brave, and determined. Rose clung to his side, calling out encouragements to Clara, and together the small family worked through the crisis. By the time the storm passed, Clara was drenched, exhausted, and muddy, but a sense of accomplishment filled her. Daniel, who had been tense and focused throughout the ordeal, finally allowed a small, rare smile. "You did well today," he said quietly, and Clara, panting and soaked, felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was the first time she realized that her efforts were not unnoticed, that her presence mattered in ways she had never imagined. Nights on the ranch were quiet and reflective. Clara often stayed up after the children were asleep, mending clothes, preparing meals for the next day, or simply writing in a small notebook she had brought from home. She wrote about her experiences, about the children's small victories and struggles, and about the subtle ways life on the ranch was shaping her. Each day, she felt herself growing stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. She began to believe that she had value, that she could contribute in meaningful ways, and that perhaps one day she might even be seen as more than just a caretaker. As the weeks turned into months, Clara noticed changes in Samuel and Rose as well. Samuel, who had been guarded and independent, began to seek her out for guidance and comfort. He would ask her to read stories to him, to help with his homework, or simply to sit with him quietly after a long day. Rose became increasingly attached, often following Clara around the ranch, holding her hand or climbing onto her lap during quiet moments. Clara learned to navigate their personalities, to offer comfort without overstepping, and to celebrate their small accomplishments with genuine joy. Daniel's view of Clara evolved too, though he remained cautious with his emotions. He saw the children's laughter return, the quiet routines of the house feel alive again, and he noticed the small, thoughtful touches Clara added to the home, fresh flowers on the table, neatly folded laundry, and carefully prepared meals. He began to realize that Clara's presence was transforming more than just the household chores. She was bringing stability, warmth, and love to a family that had known loss and hardship. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Clara sat on the porch with the children, helping Rose braid her hair while Samuel leaned against the railing, watching. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink, the air filled with the faint scent of hay and grass. Clara felt a deep sense of peace in that moment. She realized that she had found a place where she was needed, a role where her efforts mattered, and people who were beginning to trust and rely on her. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the letters, the train ride, the fear of the unknown, and she felt proud of herself. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she was more than overlooked, where she could be part of a family, and where her contributions could create happiness and stability for those around her. Daniel, watching from a distance, felt something stir inside him as well. He had been cautious and reserved, carrying the weight of loss and responsibility on his shoulders for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to allow someone into his life. Clara's quiet strength, her dedication, and the way she had bonded with the children slowly began to break down the walls he had built. He did not rush to express it, nor did he force affection, but he noticed the small moments, the way Samuel sought her guidance, Rose's laughter, and the way the house felt alive again. These signs made him realize that Clara was not just fulfilling duties, she was becoming a part of their lives in a way that could not be measured by work alone. There were moments of doubt, of course. Clara sometimes wondered if she was doing enough, if she was meeting the needs of the children, or if she would ever be truly accepted. Samuel would sometimes retreat into silence, and Rose's spirited questions could feel overwhelming. Yet each challenge became a lesson, teaching her patience, empathy, and the art of quiet observation. She learned to recognize the subtle cues of each child, when Samuel needed encouragement without words, when Rose needed reassurance through touch, when Daniel needed support without being asked. One particularly cold morning, Clara helped the children prepare for school while the wind cut through the valley like a blade. Samuel struggled with his coat, the buttons sticking, and Rose insisted on wearing her favorite scarf, which was too long and dragged through the mud. Clara guided them gently, correcting mistakes with patience and humor, and by the time they were ready, both children were smiling. Samuel even offered her a small, shy thank you, and Rose hugged her tightly before leaving. Clara felt a quiet joy, a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with appearance or recognition, but everything to do with connection. Over time, the household settled into a rhythm. The chores became more manageable as Clara learned the land and the routines. The children grew more confident, and their bond with her deepened. Daniel noticed not only the improvement in the home, but also in himself. He began to appreciate Clara's presence not only for the care she provided, but for the sense of warmth, hope, and stability she brought to his life. He began to realize that the woman who had once claimed she was not fit for any man was quietly transforming the household and, in subtle ways, touching his heart. One evening after the children were asleep, Clara sat by the fireplace with Daniel, helping him mend a small tear in his shirt. The room was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the occasional sigh of the wind outside. Daniel looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've done a lot for this family," he said softly. Clara shook her head. "I'm just doing what I can," she replied gently. "I'm learning like everyone else." Daniel did not respond immediately, but inside he felt a shift. He realized that Clara's contribution went beyond chores and meals. She had brought life back into the home, warmth into the children's hearts, and a quiet steadiness that he had been missing. Her presence had become essential, not just for practical reasons, but for emotional ones as well. Clara, meanwhile, felt herself changing in ways she had never anticipated. She was no longer just a plain, overlooked woman from a small town. She was a teacher, a caregiver, a confidant, and a friend. She was learning resilience, patience, and the quiet power of consistent care. Most importantly, she began to see herself differently. She realized that worth was not measured by appearance, charm, or the opinions of strangers. It was measured by the love, attention, and effort one put into the lives of others. By the end of the first year, the Hayes household was transformed. The children laughed more freely, Daniel allowed himself moments of relaxation, and Clara had become an integral part of the family. The work was never easy, and the days were long, but each day brought small victories. A smile, a laugh, a completed chore, a quiet moment of connection. Clara had finally found a place where her presence mattered, where her efforts were appreciated, and where love could grow quietly, steadily, and deeply. The years on the ranch had brought a sense of rhythm and familiarity to Clara's life. She knew the patterns of the seasons, the habits of the animals, and the moods of the children. Samuel had grown more confident and open, no longer the cautious boy who had first observed her from a distance. Rose was lively, adventurous, and endlessly curious, often trailing after Clara with her small hands seeking attention or comfort. Daniel Hayes, who had once been reserved and guarded, had begun to soften in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. Yet despite all this progress, there remained unspoken walls. Clara still carried a quiet belief that she was not enough for a man like Daniel, that she was merely a caretaker, a helper, someone who could bring stability but not companionship. Daniel, for his part, remained careful with his heart. He appreciated Clara, relied on her, and trusted her with his children, but he was unsure how to allow his feelings to grow into something deeper. The weight of loss, of responsibilities, and of fear of being hurt again kept him quiet. The turning point arrived one late afternoon. The air was crisp, tinged with the first whispers of autumn. Clara was in the barn, checking on the horses, when she heard a sudden, panicked cry from the corral. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. Samuel had been thrown from a restless horse, the small animal frightened by a sudden noise in the nearby field. Clara reached him quickly, her hands steady as she assessed the situation. His leg was scraped and bruised, his clothes torn, and his small body trembling with shock. "Samuel, it's all right," she said firmly but gently, guiding him to a safe spot. "You're safe now, it's over." The boy buried his face against her shoulder, sobs shaking his frame. Clara wrapped her arms around him, murmuring calming words, stroking his hair, and holding him until the panic subsided. She cleaned his wounds carefully, applying ointment and bandages, talking to him the entire time. Rose hovered nearby, clutching Clara's hand, offering her small gestures of support, and asking if Samuel was going to be okay. Daniel arrived shortly after, having heard the commotion. He took in the scene silently, his brow furrowed, but he did not rush in or take over. Instead, he observed Clara with a mixture of admiration and awe. She had handled the crisis calmly, attentively, and with deep care. She was not panicked, not distracted. She was fully present, offering Samuel comfort and safety. After Samuel was settled in the house, Clara stayed by his bedside well into the night. She held his hand, whispered stories, and sang softly when he could not sleep. Daniel watched from the doorway for a long moment, silently acknowledging the dedication she had shown. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic declaration, just the quiet strength of a woman who loved without expectation, who gave herself fully to the people she cared about. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara sat by the fire in her small room, reflecting on the events of the day. She felt exhausted but fulfilled, the kind of exhaustion that comes from giving fully of oneself. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the letters exchanged with Daniel, about the long train ride, and about the quiet hope that had led her to accept this new life. She realized that she had found a place where she mattered, where her presence was valued, and where she had the power to influence the happiness of others. Daniel, meanwhile, could not sleep. He moved quietly through the house, checking on the children and observing Clara from a distance. He felt something stirring within him, a recognition that her love was not conditional, that her presence had become essential, and that the home he had once managed alone now thrived because of her. He realized that Clara had never claimed to be perfect, never promised romance, but had offered something deeper and rarer, unwavering care and devotion. In the following weeks, Clara's relationship with the children continued to deepen. Samuel began to seek her guidance for small projects around the ranch, asking for her help not because he needed it, but because he trusted her judgment. Rose became even more attached, often holding her hand as they walked through the fields or sitting close during meals. Clara discovered the power of consistency, of showing love through small daily acts, and how those acts could build trust, confidence, and a sense of belonging in young hearts. One evening, a particularly harsh wind swept through the valley, rattling windows and sending leaves tumbling across the yard. Clara had been mending clothes when the wind picked up. and she rushed to the children's room to ensure they were safe and warm. Samuel and Rose clung to her, seeking comfort and reassurance, and she held them close, whispering words of calm. Daniel entered the room quietly, watching her with silent appreciation. He understood then what he had been hesitant to admit. Clara's love for his children was unwavering, selfless, and profound. It was during moments like these that Daniel began to feel something he had not allowed himself to feel in years, a deep, quiet admiration and affection for Clara herself. He realized that her plain appearance, which she had feared made her unworthy, had never mattered. Her value lay in her heart, her patience, and her unwavering presence. And as he observed her caring for the children, he felt a stirring in his own heart, a recognition that he had been waiting for someone like her, someone who could bring love and stability back into his life. Clara, unaware of Daniel's internal reflections, continued her work quietly and diligently. She still did not see herself as worthy of romantic love, still believed she was plain and ordinary. Yet the children's laughter, their growing confidence, and the smooth rhythm of daily life began to show her that her efforts were transforming more than just routines. They were shaping lives, including her own. She discovered a quiet pride in her ability to nurture, to guide, and to love without expectation. The seasons changed, bringing new challenges and joys. Winter arrived with snow and icy winds, and Clara learned to navigate the hazards of cold, frozen mornings, while ensuring the animals were cared for, and the children remained warm and safe. Spring brought new life, newborn calves, blooming flowers, and the renewal of hope in small, everyday moments. Clara celebrated each success, no matter how minor, knowing that these small victories contributed to the stability and happiness of the household. One afternoon, as Clara and Daniel were repairing a section of fence together, Daniel paused to watch her handle the heavy tools with steady hands and determination. He realized that her presence was no longer merely supportive, it was transformative. She had brought life, warmth, and resilience to a home that had known sorrow and uncertainty. He could see the bond she shared with his children, the subtle ways she had earned their trust and affection, and he understood that he had been wrong to underestimate her. That evening, after the children were asleep, Daniel found himself sitting quietly in the living room, reflecting on the journey that had brought Clara into their lives. He thought about her first arrival at the station, about the letters she had written, and about the courage it had taken to leave everything familiar behind. He felt a deep respect and admiration for her honesty, integrity, and strength. And slowly he felt the first stirrings of love, quiet, profound, and undeniable. Clara, meanwhile, sat by the fire in her room, knitting quietly and thinking about the children's progress. She realized that she had grown in ways she never expected, stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own value. She began to see herself differently, understanding that worth was not measured by beauty or charm, but by the love, care, and dedication one offered to others. She had found a place where she belonged, where she was needed, and where her heart could grow without fear. The moment of recognition between Daniel and Clara came slowly, almost imperceptibly. One evening, the family gathered around the table for dinner. Samuel had spilled his milk, Rose had knocked over a small plate, and Clara had laughed softly, cleaning up the mess without complaint. Daniel watched her, noticing the patience, grace, and humor she displayed in even the smallest tasks. He realized that she had never asked for admiration, never sought validation, yet she had earned his deepest respect and affection. After the children were tucked into bed, Daniel approached Clara. He did not speak immediately, simply observing her as she folded laundry by the fire. She looked up, startled, and met his gaze. There was a quiet understanding in his eyes, a recognition that words could not fully express. He reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "You said you weren't fit for any man," he said softly. "But you've been exactly what this family needed, and more than I ever realized. You've brought life, warmth, and love back into this home, and I've come to see that I cannot imagine it without you." Clara felt tears welling in her eyes. For the first time in her life, someone saw her fully, not just as a helper, not just as a caregiver, but as a woman worthy of love and partnership. She felt her own heart swell with emotion, understanding that the journey she had undertaken, with all its fears and doubts, had led her to this moment. They stood together quietly, hands clasped, as the night settled around them. No words were needed beyond what had been spoken. The love that had grown slowly, patiently, and quietly had reached its natural recognition. Daniel went quiet, overwhelmed not by words, but by the depth of feeling that had built between them. Clara understood the silence. It was a silence full of acknowledgement, admiration, and profound connection. In that quiet moment, the family was whole. Samuel and Rose slept peacefully, unaware of the depth of emotion unfolding in the room. Clara and Daniel had found a balance between love, trust, and mutual respect. A love built not on appearances or expectations, but on care, patience, and unwavering presence. From that day forward, life on the ranch continued with its familiar rhythm, but everything had changed. The children thrived, the home felt warmer than ever, and Clara and Daniel moved forward together, their hearts quietly intertwined. The love they shared was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, patient, and enduring, the kind of love that grows strongest in the quiet moments of life, in shared struggles, in small acts of care, and in the simple joy of belonging. And so, the woman who had once believed she was not fit for any man became the heart of a family, proving that love is not about perfection, beauty, or grandeur. It is about courage, care, and the willingness to be present for those who need it most. And sometimes, when the heart is ready, even a quiet cowboy goes silent, because words are no longer necessary. The heart has already spoken.